Thank you. Good day. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of Cigniti and Broadcom, my name is Sairam Vedam. I'm the Global Chief Marketing Officer here at Cigniti. This edition of Digital Dialogues Fireside Chat series that we take a lot of pride in sharing with the community, sharing pragmatic, real insights from practitioners and leaders. Today, we have an interesting topic, quality engineering for the digital enterprise. Well, as we know, every business getting disrupted by a confluence of digital technologies and software. The tyranny today is how do I ensure software quality is at the center of everything? Because impeccable software quality assures frictionless digital experiences. The pace at which software is getting delivered is the whole challenge. So, in that note, talking about building a digital enterprise with software quality, security, and speed as some of the cornerstones of that will be a very interesting subject. And today I have two very senior leaders representing Broadcom and Cigniti. Shamim from Broadcom, the CTO of DevOps at Broadcom, and Raghu, who's the Chief Delivery Officer and Global Innovation and Practices Offering Management Head from Cigniti Technologies. I will get to introduce the illustrious bios of both the leaders in a few minutes from now. Before I do that, let's get some context setting. Um, Businesses that adopt DevOps can actually provide high quality releases with fewer performance issues and definitely can ensure customer experience being enhanced. That's what research says. Customer experience, loyalty, brand reputation, and revenue all improves as a consequence of impeccable quality, good data hygiene, enhanced security, and simplified data administration. So let me give a real factoid to back up this research. For a team at US insurance company, one of the insurance companies in the US, collecting of test data accounted for 16% of all testing efforts. Therefore, in this case, $3 million was spent only on test data management for about a $20 million delivery project. The company was eventually able to save about $450,000 on software testing expenses by implementing enhanced TDM capabilities, the test data management. We often get to know that software teams do not have access to the necessary test data in many businesses, and hence teams must provide with self-service access to test data to overcome such challenges, enabling integration of data, consumption into CI/CD data pipelines, and API accesses, and so on and so forth. Summary: what I want to drive down today, as companies race to become digital first, the maze, the complex digital landscape of technologies that they're grappling with, it's very important that technologies like test data management, service virtualization, and usage of agile requirements designers come into right set of models, and that's what we're going to discuss. So typically, when you use an ARD, for example, to test, at agile speeds, there is a significant reduction in manual testing efforts. So this digital dialogue today would focus on how businesses adopting practices of whatever I spoke around effective DevOps can actually ensure quality releases, how service virtualization would facilitate testing and that could ease project management, investing in an effective TDM strategy could reduce the whole cost of storing and processing test data and eventually increasing test cycle efficiency. Lastly, how agile requirements designer would become a key to ensure better customer experience. So with that as a background, I would want to welcome Shamim and Raghu once again. Shamim is currently the CTO for continuous delivery at Broadcom, where he's responsible for innovating DevOps solutions using Broadcom's industry-leading technologies. An accomplished thought leader in DevOps, continuous delivery, and continuous testing, he spent the last 15 and more years experienced, large-scale application design and development, lifecycle management, R&D, and application quality assurance. I'm also very delighted to update Shamim, holds 2 US patents, has been awarded the Innovator of Year while he was at HP, and he's a co-author of several leading technical publications. Shamim is joining us from Dallas today. Shamim, nice to have you today. Good morning.
Thank you, Sam. So,
hope you've been
good
having
morning,
a good
good
day.
afternoon to everybody. Yeah,
I'm very sure the audience are waiting to hear from you. And along with Shamim, let me take a minute to welcome Raghu. Raghu is the Chief Delivery Officer, President and Global Delivery Head at Cigniti. He oversees all the customer interface engagements at Cigniti, being at the forefront of driving our innovation practices and offerings that have put Cigniti at the forefront, world's leading AI-led digital assurance leader, transforming global companies' initiatives driven by software quality and automation. Raghu is an accomplished and a veteran with 25 years of experience holding different leadership positions, driving in complex testing engagements, digital engineering and quality assurance, and large scale program managements for global 2000 companies. Time and again, his human centric leadership have dealt in significant amount of impeccable results for our customers. He's an active and influential speaker par excellence in global platforms. And what I really like and admire about Raghu and also Shamim, they like to keep things really simple. So with that as an ado, let me welcome Raghu as well. Hey, Raghu, thanks for joining in.
Thank you, Sai. Excited to be in this session.
Wonderful. I've taken few minutes, but I'm excited as much as our audience. Before we get going, a few rules of the house. I would request audience to have your questions typed in on the chat window, and we will be very happy to answer as many of them as we move towards the whole digital dialogue. And any suggestions and improvements you can always write to us. This digital dialogue session would be recorded and would be shared with every one of you. And it would also be available as an on-record webinar on our website. Cigniti Technologies, the world's leading AI-led, IP-led digital assurance and digital engineering services company, takes pride in having you all today. Let me open up the conversation by going to Shamim. And what we would do is we would sort of move back and forth between Shamim and Raghu and hear their insights. So Shamim, why do you think test data management is so very important for enterprises today? What is that you are seeing as a practitioner, and what has been your experiences in this dimension?
Yeah, thank you, Sai, for the question. As you mentioned, we live in a data-driven world of digital applications where time to market and quality are extremely important, right? In such an ecosystem that's extremely data-driven, in order to assure better quality of applications, it's extremely important to test these applications with the appropriate set of test data conditions to ensure that we have not only just the right test coverage, but also the right data coverage. For example, just testing extensively with a large number of test cases, but limited set of test data does not ensure that you've got good test coverage. You also need a variety of data and also the appropriate volume of data in some conditions, right? You also need things like data for the edge conditions, error conditions, and so on and so forth. Different types of tests require different types of data. For example, in functional tests, you need a wide variety of data, whereas for performance testing, like you mentioned, you might need more voluminous data, right? However, creating data manually is generally very laborious. Like you mentioned, this company was spending 16% of their SDLC effort in just creating data, right? So it's very time intensive, it's erroneous, and it's often the biggest bottleneck in application delivery, and definitely the biggest bottleneck in testing. I mean, we've surveyed customers that tell us over and over again that that's the biggest problem. And so test data management as a technology alleviates both of those problems, right? By automating the creation and the provisioning of the data, so the delays are limited, and also because we can provide all the data, it can help to improve the quality of the application by supporting better testing. The other thing, Sai, for digital systems that's extremely important is the securing of the data in pre-production environments. We hear multiple times about breaches that have happened, not because of the breach in production, but because there was sensitive data in pre-production environments that got inadvertently or intentionally accessed, right? So we need to make sure that when customers provision data into the pre-production environments and test environments by subsetting for production, we mask the data correctly to protect sensitive information or PII information for various reasons, right? Not just for preventing breaches, but also for regulatory reasons, right? Like GDPR and other regulatory functions that are required. So this is also a very key function of TDM, which is very, very important in secure modern enterprises to secure the data. So the TDM, in a nutshell, gives us the ability to address all of these needs for digital systems, right? The ability to provide both a variety and volume of data quickly, and number two, securely. So hopefully that summarizes, the key benefits for TDM.
Spot on. I mean, that's what we as a global organization get to see with our customers. Can't agree with you more than that. When you brought up compliances like GDPR and sensitive, enterprise data that all our teams, work with day on a day basis. On that background, Raghu, why do you think automated test data is actually a key to CI/CD and DevOps? What is it that you're seeing as a practitioner, and how is that you're making sure clients are actually taking advantage of the extensive automation capabilities that we sort of bring in more from a practitioner perspective?
Sure, Sai. I think both of you have alluded so far in terms of how important is test data to the overall test lifecycle, and it's been a problem. I mean, across thousands of surveys that have been conducted for over a decade now, right? So it's like this. So if you visualize test data to be one gear of the wheel, which sits on the test case, which is also an interlocked wheel, and together they run a test scenario for a given business process or for a given product feature, it will be illogical to imagine that these two wheels are not at the same speed in terms of revolving onto each other. Otherwise, you can never catch up the overall momentum. So CI/CD and DevOps, I mean, the first thing that comes to people's mind the moment you say CI/CD and DevOps, because of the word also continuous inside it, is one that it is always on, and it is not always on, but it also helps you accelerate. So when you talk about acceleration, nothing can beat better than automation, right? So if the entire pipeline that is laid in the SDLC is an orchestration of different processes and tools coming together between dev and ops, and you have laid that accelerated pipeline, and your application is flowing through it, and therefore you are now testing for that application as it flows through with your test cases in an automated fashion. It is but natural to think about test data coming in as an input to it also in an automated fashion. If test data doesn't come in an automated fashion, it doesn't take the mileage of the test case, which is also automated, right? So therefore it slows down the entire pipeline and creates several bottlenecks. So I would say, why automate test data in a CI/CD environment? The first answer to that is match the speed of the other components. Now, the second reason, therefore, when you match the speed, and of course, it's not just throwing in the data in an automated fashion, but it is also about throwing in the data in an automated fashion in a timely manner. And the data being what Shamim also spoke about is to ensure that we know when it is voluminous, when there is variety, and there are two more attributes which are important, which is accuracy and availability of that component of test data. So unless you automate that with those attributes and feed into the test script, the whole pipeline would get slowed down, as I was talking about. So if you match the speed, then the second consequence that will come is you unlock the value of the CI/CD channel, which is market velocity. I mean, without that, you still can do a great testing of the application, but you don't get that market velocity. So you have to unlock that CI/CD value chain. And most importantly, I think only when you embed automated test data into the overall pipeline, you naturally get an ability to continuously access the test data at any given point in time. So these are some of the reasons I could think of why do you have to automate test data in the first place as far as CI/CD is concerned.
Well, already I think we've gone onto a level of intensity which emphasizes three things, right? Shamim spoke about the security, the reliability. He also touched about the volume and veracity of the data. And you kind of came from the fact that orchestrating at the speed at which the velocity at which the releases are happening, and why the throttle of data automation is important. This can't get technical than this one. I'm sure the audience are glued on to this one. I also wanted to sort of announce that we also have a joint white paper that we've authored, Cigniti and Broadcom together, which sort of unravels this whole puzzle, which I would encourage the audience to download. Getting back to Shamim, Shamim, we have this agile requirements designer. So what's your viewpoint? Why do you think agile requirements designer is important, and how does it actually help in truly optimizing testing?
Yeah, great question, Sai. So we live in a world of agile delivery, right? So you mentioned it, Raghu's mentioned it, and it's extremely important in that context to keep the gear moving. And we know that one of the biggest bottlenecks is testing. In fact, most of our customers are either doing over testing or under testing. So it's very, very important to right size the testing so it is just enough, right? So that's what we call optimized testing. So for those of our viewers who don't know what ARD is, ARD stands for Agile Requirements Designer. It's a Broadcom technology. It's a behavioral modeling tool. So what we do here is we model the behavior of the application in the form of a flow diagram. And think of this like a simple Visio type diagram where you have, the steps that the user needs to execute in a workflow to get their work done, right? So it's really the capturing of the behavior of the application in the form of a visual flow diagram. So that's really what ARD is. And you can create these flows, or what we call models, at different levels of abstraction and granularity. For example, you can define these for acceptance testing at the requirements and feature level. You can define them for integration tests, or for like end-to-end user testing. So you can define them at various levels of abstraction, right? Matching the kinds of requirements that you have. So once you have that, ARD does magic in terms of optimization, multiple ways. So let me go through, I don't have time to go through all the ways, but let me just go through some of the key ways, right? Number one is it helps us capture the requirements and the test conditions unambiguously, right? Oftentimes we hear that requirements are not often well understood. There is a misunderstanding between the product owner, the developer, and the tester, and oftentimes because of that, we have to do a lot of rework, right? So because ARD is a visual modeling tool, right? So it's easy for people to collaborate together using a diagram versus, say, just writing user stories, right? Nobody just writes user stories, right? It starts out by the product owners starting to sketch out something on the whiteboard, right? That kind of shows what the flow is, and they translate that to user stories. It's a natural way of thinking of collaboration. So ARD essentially digitizes the whole whiteboard process, right? If you think about the whole flow diagramming, you just translate it to a digital canvas, and that captures the truth about what the product owner wants in terms of the behavior of the application, right? So that allows better collaboration and therefore removal of ambiguity that is inherent in the requirements capture process, right? So oftentimes, for example, customers do behavior-driven development, for example, right? BDD for short. So what ARD does is, for example, transform that process into what we call a visual model-driven BDD, because it's much easier and cleaner to describe a flow in the form of a diagram than having to write feature files, right, for every behavior of the application that, in a form of text, right? So that's the first piece of it. But the second piece of it, and I think you alluded to this, Sai, is once the model is built, ARD completely automates the test design. As you know, the test design process is one of the most critical and highly, requires a great deal of skill to get right. How do you go from a set of requirements to the right set of tests? So ARD uses algorithms to completely automate that process and remove the manual, all of the manual aspects of test design, right? Because test design is currently a little bit of subjective, takes a lot of time. Right. It completely automates the test design process and generates the right set of test cases based on the coverage that you need, right? Which leads to my next point, right? Because if you ask many enterprises, what is your test coverage, right? And they'll give you different answers. It's a very subjective, perspective, right? Whereas with ARD, you can generate tests with the precise coverage that you want. So, for example, you want to have some tests that have higher coverage and others that have less coverage, right? So with the ARD, you can tell the system, hey, generate tests for the highest level of coverage, for example, for my progressive tests, and maybe less coverage, for my other kind of tests, right? But you can be very, very precise and subjective about that. And ARD supports a whole bunch of graph theoretic algorithms to do that. And last but not the least, we live in a world of change, right? Change happens constantly. So one of the key things that ARD does is supports this concept of change impact testing. So when your requirements change, we want to figure out exactly what's the impact of the change so we can focus our testing on the components that have been impacted by the change, right? And oftentimes it's a manual process, it's time consuming. So ARD will tell us exactly, for example, these are the new sets of tests you need. Here are the tests that need to be modified. And here are the tests you don't need at all. I mean, think about it. Have you ever seen a customer take test cases out of the regression suite? Nobody does that because everybody's afraid. So the test regression suites keep growing and growing and growing and growing. And so with ARD, you have the ability to right size. And believe it or not, we worked with customers. We looked at the regression suite. We reversed engineered the test using ARD and able to, optimize their test suite by 50% or more by deleting redundant test cases, removing tests that are no longer necessary, and so on and so forth. And the other thing that ARD does, and I'm going a little bit along here, is the automation of the test cases themselves, right? So Raghu mentioned automation. It's very, very important to have test data automation. It's also important to have test automation, right? But we also know that creating test automation, maintaining automation script is also a big problem, right?
Got
it. So ARD helps to not only design your test cases, it also helps to automate your test cases from the model itself, but not only just automate, it can automate for a variety of different target scenarios. For example, you need to automate for the mobile testing environment or for a mainframe environment or for other environments, and you can generate automations for all of those different or endpoints based on a common model. So you got to maintain the model and the automation scenarios once, and you generate all of these things as and when your test cases are refreshed based on change impact testing. You can refresh the automation, all in once. And the last point I'm going to make, and this is regarding test data, since we're talking about test data, it turns out ARD provides a great way to manage and optimize your test data.
Okay.
So it's one thing, Sai, to provision test data, right, on demand and at speed. But the second question comes up, is that test data matching the needs of your test? Right? But that's what we call test data matching. Am I over provisioning? Am I under provisioning? Right? Correct. Because in a world of CI/CD, everything has to be just about right, optimized, right?
Right.
So one of the best ways to do this is to embed your test data conditions inside of ARD and then integrate ARD with TDM so that you can generate just the right test data for the right set of tests. So you're not under provisioning or over provisioning, right? You're providing just about the right data for the tests you need. So again, I babbled a lot here, but in my mind, those are the top benefits of ARD and model-based testing. I know there are a whole bunch of other things. If there are any questions later on from the audience, I'm happy to answer.
No, I think for practitioners, I think this was a good intro about the ARD. It's a good segue to have Raghu's opinion. Like, Raghu, why do you think the TDM's role, what's actually its role in DevOps? I mean, we heard about a tool that can, enhance the effectiveness of test case design and how it can link to the whole DevOps chain from Shamim. What is your view? Why do you think, what's TDM's role actually in DevOps?
Sure, Zai. I think the key word there in TDM is M, management, right? Management of TD. I think every one of us understand test data, but the complexity and the simplicity both occur only when you add the word management to it, how easy you do it and how well you do it. So if you take a parlance to test management, generally as a word that we use, we talk about the whole life cycle. One has to understand that TD also is a resource in the project, right? It's an asset. Generally requirements, test scripts or test cases as they call, these are the ones where the focus is more, because you start listening to the story, you write a test case, then you execute against a requirement. TD therefore plays an important resource component in the overall mix. Now, to manage that resource overall is where we will need to appreciate that managing test data is as good as and as important as managing the overall test management life cycle. And of course, um, why test data is a more fundamental question. All of us know at the end of the day, we are not sure that we cover all the scenarios. We, however creative we are as developers and however visionary we are as product managers and however analytical we are as testers, we miss, as Shamim talks about, boundary conditions, edge conditions, stuff like that. So test data therefore becomes vital. Now, how do you manage it? Now, the way you create test data, the way you store it, the way you make it available, and the way and the most important way is the way you also dispose it off when you don't need it. That's again a very less attention paid part of the test management lifecycle, like how Shamim was talking about. Do you ever take out tests out of regression suites? No. So your test data also grows and grows and grows and becomes outdated, right? And then suddenly, suddenly again you go again reinventing the wheel. So the whole life cycle of creating, storing, deleting, and updating test data, refreshing test data is all about TDM, and it should be in sync with the overall testing life cycle that we are doing. And of course, again within creation, I mean, we can go into each of these phases in details, but just throwing a light on creation for a moment. Now, one is the easiest way, if you take a value chain of test data, right? The easiest way to do that is take a subset of prod, use as it is, but so long as it doesn't contain sensitive information. Now, if you flag that it contains sensitive information, then you take a subset, use mask, scrub everything, and make it available. That's the second step in the value chain. Now, you don't have production data access, then you start creating, right? So then that is synthetic data. And then apart from just using some basic test data generators to create test data, you probably also have to do a little bit of transformation on it to make it more meaningful to a test scenario. That's the next step in the value chain. But the highest step in the value chain is to have a mix of all of these, because no enterprise has a single requirement, right? It is often a mix of all of this, and that is where the complexity is. Now, if you take that to be the test data universe, to be able to create, store, manage, delete, and make it available across the life cycle becomes the backbone spine of the entire test management life cycle. And therefore, TDM is going to play or is playing a very, very pivotal role. And that's the biggest reason why your test is either not covered well or not done well on time.
Got it. I think I can relate to that point that Shamim mentioned, about the coverage aspect. When you ask questions about it, you get different answers. And, the depth to which he spoke about ARD and the correlation that you sort of put as the spine for the whole thing emphasizes the importance of it. Switching on gears now, we would want to have maybe Shamim, let's talk a little on service virtualization in DevOps, right? So why do you think it is all important? What does SV mean from a different perspectives of practitioners, implementers, testers, coders, and whatnot? Throw us some light and how are you seeing SV, service virtualization as we call it, is evolving as technology improvises every day?
Yeah, great question again, Sai. So for those of people who may not be familiar, service virtualization is it's a technology that helps us simulate the dependency between applications, right? So if you've got an application A that depends on application B, and if application B is not available at the time that you're developing A, then you have a constraint, right? So because A is now waiting for B to become available so that you can do the testing and the development, right? So what service virtualization does is enable you to break that bottleneck of the wait time, right? Because what you can do now is to replace B with a virtual copy, or we call a simulator that represents B, so that it's available to all of the consumers of that application, regardless of whether B is available at that time or not, right? So instead of provisioning the real application, you're provisioning a simple virtual machine, or so to speak, a simulator that acts and feels like the real thing, right? That in essence is service virtualization. So So once you have this, you can understand why it plays such a great role for both enabling velocity and quality, right? So you mentioned different personas and different times of the life cycle. Let's start with the developers, right? So for developers, we live in a world of digital systems where everything is API-based, microservices, distributed architectures, which means there's a whole bunch of dependencies between systems. In such a world, right, you inevitably are going to run into this problem of I'm building my system and I have so many dependencies and these things are not available. It's just too difficult to provision all these environments with all these systems in there, right? So that is the number one bottleneck for developers, which is why they don't do enough unit and component testing as part of shift left, right? Because of these dependencies. So service virtualization plays the number one key role to help enable, remove those dependencies, remove those constraints by being able to provide these simulators so that developers can test their hearts out in early stage, right? When they're doing unit and component testing by replacing these real endpoints with these lightweight virtual endpoints, right? That's the number one thing for developers, to enable them to do all their application testing, particularly from unit and component testing, which is so important for DevOps, right? Number two, for testers, right? So for testers, similarly, we have a problem, right? When you go to system testing or integration testing, you still need to have all these dependencies resolved, right? Again, big problem, and particularly during testing, you need to not only provision these endpoints, but you also have to bring along the test data that support the endpoints to support realistic integration testing and system testing, which is probably less of a concern for unit testing. So for developers, for testers, in addition to the developers, service virtualization provides a great benefit by being able to provision these virtual endpoints so that I can focus on the testing of my application to test and not have to worry about provisioning all these things. And to Raghu's point, right, because everything is CI/CD, it's much more easier to provision these virtual services than to provision the real application. It's easy to tie it with CI/CD engines like Jenkins and deploy them on, for example, you can deploy them on cloud environments, for example, with as Broadcom service virtualization tool, you can package these virtual services as containers, which makes it very easy. So think about, say a backend application like a mainframe or an SAP, and think about if you have a dependency on that, right? Think about the amount of time it takes to set up an SAP environment versus a virtual service that represents SAP. You can provision that in 2 minutes or less compared to like 2 hours. And now we think about mainframe environments, right? So the list keeps going on and on. Particularly, the more legacy type of integrations you have, the bigger is the value of service virtualization.
Yeah.
Also, too, since we're talking about test data management, right? I mean, using SV is one of the easiest ways to lower the TDM burden, right? So when you think about provisioning an entire application, you also have to provision the entire test data with it, right? To test along with it, right? From an integration perspective, using an SV means you can now, tie that virtual service to a much lesser set of easier, cleaner set of test data that you can synthesize, but without having to provision everything, because either you can get the test data from the recording itself, or you can take a recording and add more test data to it. But regardless, we have found that it's much easier to maintain and manage test data through a virtual service than it is through a real, service endpoint. We also found very interesting use cases, aside from modern digital applications, and that is the use of SV for negative testing and chaos testing. So we know chaos testing is very popular. Model digital enterprises like Netflix and everything, right? So think about what happens, right? You've got an application, you inject failure conditions into it. They talk about, like, for example, yanking a server or taking down an EC2 Amazon server, right? So, if you have a virtual service, it's easy to say, okay, the service is not available. Or I can simulate a service degradation of the dependency and say, hey, if I have this virtual service respond, at a different level of service, what's the impact on my application? So I can do all these simulations without being truly destructive. It makes it much easier to do negative testing, chaos testing, particularly in a scenario where it's difficult to manipulate the real application, right? If you think of banking and insurance systems, it's not that easy to just take a yank a system of that, right?
Right.
When I talk to my banks and insurance clients, they say, you know what, we're not selling shoes, we're not selling movies, we're selling real systems that matter, right? So using SV is much easier to do the shift right and do the negative testing, the chaos testing, and everything. And I think to Raghu's point, the CI/CD is so important to keep the pipeline moving, right? And with virtual services, as I mentioned, it's much easier to integrate with CI/CD systems and provision and deploy these virtual services in place of the real world applications, right? So in short, Sai, I hope I addressed all of the different personas you mentioned. So it's a great impact for
Yes.
developers, testers, deployment engineers, and also for people like site reliability engineers, for as you mentioned, for shifting right and doing chaos testing and so on and so forth, right? So I think pretty much every persona in the SDLC is impacted and benefited from serverless virtualization.
Oh, absolutely. This has been very refreshing. It's a bit, little beyond the 101 of SV and the persona diversification that you covered. I mean, I could recollect days when I had to set up labs of multivarious applications where there was no virtualized environments, and I can correlate the pain that we all went through. And with that, I mean, let me bring in, so Raghu, I mean, where do you think deploying service virtualization derives maximum benefits, right? For example, we heard Shamim talking about chaos testing. Shamim, just on that note, Cigniti, for example, today, we're working on chaos testing for one of the largest financial services customers. So I'm sure Raghu has some interesting insights from a deployment of a SV for deriving good benefits. Raghu, some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think based on the experience we have had with multiple clients, I can probably put together some do's and don'ts or some thoughts that could be replicated in other situations, right? So there are two parts to your question: when and how, right? And I think Shamim did a fantastic coverage on almost creating an SV character in our minds and how it affects different personas. I really appreciate that. Now, to answer the question when, I think as early as possible, right? In fact, that should be the starting point. To also connecting to what Shamim said, I mean, it is just not possible to create all the systems up and running at the same time. I mean, it only happens in the architecture blueprint on the dashboard or on the whiteboard, and that also changes. So when, as early as possible. In fact, as we draw out the architecture, we would know which of those components can come from commercial tools, which of those components are coming from tangible hardware and stuff like that. And I'm covering the broader aspect of SV here. Now, now you take a decision based on the how part of it. Now you take a decision based on what cost you can afford and fail later and write off that. And how much time do you have to make the first MVP into the market? Because that determines even the future of your architecture, whether it is going to get funded. So the when is as early and how is based on the factors that I just alluded to. The second reason of when you deploy SVs is, of course, when you need efficiencies, right? You are not, and again, connecting back to Shamim's point, you're not waiting. If you're waiting, then you're draining efficiency. So as early as possible to make it as efficient as possible, and therefore efficiency most of the times gets converted into speed. No, not always. It's a direct proportion to speed, but it whenever your market velocity is high, and of course also when cost is a factor. Now, a little bit on more on the how part is the first step at least. The first step is at least to do like any random SDLC or any program, right? You need to do a POC. You need to explore. You need to investigate before you onboard something as an SV standard in your entire SDLC lifecycle. So the first step definitely is going to be the explore and navigate sort of phase. Then you sort of scale it into certain target areas, right? This sort of test data I need more, or this sort of systems I would need more, or this sort of applications I would need more. You don't sort of do a big bang implementation of SV. You explore and you find that yes, this POC is working. I'm able to quickly develop. I'm able to quickly test with this SV component, and then you sort of distribute that across the community of developers and testers who are the consumers of this SV, right? So as I said, the first step is explore. The second is determine the target coverage areas or the scalable areas in your landscape, and eventually take it to a fully developed, I wouldn't say fully developed, it should be fully deployed SV environment, which is the end state, right? Now, will that happen at the start? No, it will go out progressively. So your SV induction into the overall landscape also is a maturity mod, if I may. People think that SV is just a substitute of a bottleneck, and therefore it's a turnkey solution. It's not. It's at a component level, it's a turnkey solution, but overall it's a maturity journey by itself. So you have a discovery, you have an implementation, and make no mistake, change management again is going to add a complicated dimension. So you change some architecture component, you change the direction of your product, then your SV components need a rejig. So that's also in that sense, if I may reuse the word, spine that allows you to mock systems which you are yet to develop and evolve your product in an integrated manner. And of course, from a commercial side, commercial tool sense, I mean, including Broadcom, there are so many tools and vendors out there in the market. You should be able to pick and choose the right tool that can provide that SV value to the overall landscape.
Absolutely. You made me sit upright by telling the importance of spine today. All right.
You mentioned at least twice, yeah.
All right. So now, I mean, this has been a very deep insight, so to speak, and to make it a little more related to how this is actually being done. Shamim, may I request you probably share some insights actually? So, see, as the world's leading platform provider that Broadcom is, and a focused digital SI and an assurance leader like Cigniti, this whole partnership. Why do you think this partnership is important from a customer ecosystem? What's the joint value proposition that Broadcom is actually seeing from your view lens? And maybe if you have a case in a point of a customer that we were speaking about, the problem that we've been solving, that will be very interesting for audience to further note it down.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think Raghu did such a great job of alluding to what the value is, right? So he talked about, for example, how do you make an SV implementation real? It's not just touch the button and it all goes. So there's a roadmap. There's a process around how you deploy SV broadly. In other words, we need to bring that services capability to truly enable a technology. We're a technology provider, right?
Right.
And a technology by itself does not generate outcomes. It's the people who use the technology, who understand what the customer's business outcomes are, and apply the technology in the right way and deploy and adopt it the right way, that helps our customers generate value. Which is why I think this collaboration partnership between a technology provider like ourselves, like Broadcom, and a service provider like yourself, truly enables our customers to get the best value from our solutions, right? You provide the expertise, the maturity model, the hand-holding, and the approach around how to make a technology successful in alignment with the customer's goals. And we provide the best of breed technology, obviously, right? So which is why I feel that this partnership is so important to really help our customers get the best of both. To that end, we have significantly invested in this partnership, right? We've enabled, both of us have invested to enable our folks in our technology itself, certification programs that we've supported. We're also, you guys also doing joint SDLC workshops for your customers and our customers, where we're not only looking at this just from a technology perspective, but from a process perspective. What are the customers' bottlenecks? That Raghu was saying, it may be related to SE, maybe related to TM, maybe related to something else altogether, right? So, but the important thing is you're taking a holistic perspective, a process-oriented perspective, and mapping a technology solution to the process problem, right? That mapping is extremely important, can only be done by a service provider like yourself, right? So, I would allude to like a large, sports retailer, right? Who have leveraged your services in conjunction with our TDM technology to alleviate a lot of the problems that we talked about, right? That's a great example of our two organizations coming together, applying best of breed technology to a customer's problem and
Got it.
helping the customer solve their problem and helping them realize their business goals.
Excellent. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the whole value point, right? So, Raghu, would you want to touch upon the value that we've delivered to this customer, and also we've been developing this unified test data management solution, right? I mean, I'm sure the white paper that we put out, elucidates that to a greater depth. But if you could summarize how you think this unified solution would help enterprises in testing processes, eventually helping in their digital transformation journey, where quality software becomes a critical component. These two pieces, I'm sure, would add more value as we move towards possible set of audience questions. There's some interesting questions for that to that.
Okay. So I think we spoke about two important components as far as TD is concerned, right? Especially one is the test data itself, and when I was answering your question around TDM, the management of the test data itself. So and Shamim also connected to the fact that it is the technology and the process. The TD is ability to generate test data is just technical in nature, right? You either copy paste, you generate, you transform, you get TD. That's enough.
Got it.
The M part, which is management, is the process, right? And 90% of the problem is not with TD. 90% of the problem is with the M part of TD. 10% is with TD. It is just that you should know who has that test data with them to be able to access it, right? So I think as part of the unified platform, what we are trying to do is strengthen that process, right? The underlying technologies of being able to generate TD, mask TD, scrub TD, that's to me is commoditized today, right? You take different tools. Probably there are different ways in which they do it for better efficiency and better security, whether it is first level encryption or 3 levels encryption of masking, whatever that is. So there is a limited value chain there. But to be able to manage that in terms of right from when to create, for whom to create, where to make it available, and how to make it available, that process wrapper is where the value is.
Okay.
So a unified test data platform is alluding to that direction. That is one part of your question. The second part of the question is what we have done in case of this client is, of course, since it's a large sports company, there are different order systems in the landscape. There is an order creation system, there is an order fulfillment system, and stuff like that. So it's a natural and a heterogeneous, it's a natural and a complicated problem to be able to ensure that all the data across these disparate systems is in sync, and that is provided as an end scenario for a tester to look at an end-to-end business process flow for testing, right? So we created layers of aggregation on those disparate systems to ensure that you have a reasonable end-to-end scenario that is not broken by these disparate systems not being in sync. And on that middle integrated system, we wrote a lot of utilities. We used a lot of Broadcom components and interfaces to ensure that we are able to scrub all the PII data. We are able to deliver that TD to a particular role or not. And the reason why I've given you this view is, again, I allude to the fact that it is not just about TD. TD is there. TD is there in different systems. So bring it all together, then scrub it and deliver it. We used the Broadcom tool to solve that sanitization and scrubbing and delivery of that TD to a particular testing role or a development role.
Got it. Well, this has been quite comprehensive. We do have some interesting questions that the audience are posing. Just to summarize, I think we sort of touched 4 different dimensions here. Fundamentally, at the DevOps being at the center bed, why does it make to invest in efficient test data management, and why does it actually is more important to do it, and also have something like a tool like Agile Requirements Designer, and an algorithmic approach for efficient test design, and then this whole notion of unified test data management, and of course, in a complex heterogeneous environment, why does an endpoint service virtualization strategy is very, very important for driving in efficiencies. And then I'm sure the white paper can actually substantiate a lot of these points that we spoke. Let me open up a question. So we have a question from Partha, is saying, can the service virtualization simulate or mock other systems in the execution of test scenarios where request or response data must be contextual and not pre-configured or hard-coded? So I'll reread it. It's a little longer sentence. Can the service virtualization simulate or mock other systems in the execution of test scenarios where request or response data must be contextual and not pre-configured or hard-coded? I mean, any one of you could pick it up.
If it's a question related to Broadcom SV, I can help answer the question.
Well, you could take it up, Shamim.
Yeah. So there's no reason why it has to be pre-configured or hard-coded, right? There's a couple of different ways in which we can set up these request response pairs, right? One is, for example, if you want to create a virtual service by recording the actual behavior of the endpoint, then you get the RR pairs that represents real behavior of the application, right? That's number one. Number two is you can define rules, right, that describe your context. One of the things that we talked about is, a data-driven virtual service, right? The synthesis between virtual services and test data management, right? So we can actually define those rules depending on the context, right, around what those request response pairs should be, and those rules fire dynamically to create those request response pairs. Now, it's possible that that process can leverage a TDM tool so that we can generate very rich set of data, right? As Raghu mentioned, you can synthetically generate a whole bunch of things, but you can also we can also take additional help by connecting SV with TDM systems so that we can actually pull real context from how end users are using the application by pulling in data from production, for example, right? So all of those things are possible. There's no need to hard code, right? So you can either record a real service, or you can program and define rules for describing your test conditions, right? And so that you can test with the virtual service with the right sort of data that suits the context of your tests.
Right. Raghu, any other comments on the same note?
Agreed. I think that is a, how do I put it? It is a logical concept. And it is not, I don't think it is limited by a tool, but Shamim covered it well.
Right. So though we've covered it at length, there's still one question on people are asking, is Agile Requirements Designer, do we have a trial version to try that out, is a question. Shamim, and someone is also asking, how does service virtualization reduce developer wait times? And is there a particular tool that you would recommend from a Broadcom portfolio? And the question is also extending to Raghu they're asking, is this something that you have been implementing? So this is something that's coming live from the audience.
First question, yes, ARD, you can get a trial license. You can go to our website, you can download a copy. It installs on your workstation. And yeah, you can download and use it. So definitely love to have you guys try it out. The second part of the question, how does service virtualization benefit developers, right? Yeah. And what technology you would recommend? So I would love to recommend our technology. Raghu might have a different opinion. We'll let him speak to that. So we talked about the developer persona, right? So regardless of what the technology is, right? For a developer, think about it. You're a microservices developer, or you're developing a component-oriented system or whatever, and you've got all these dependencies on third-party systems or other components that your organization owns, right? And it's a big, big pain for you, when you're doing unit testing and component testing, to set up all those environments, right? And they become a bottleneck because as a developer, you want to go fast. You want to be able to test and commit code to your source code management system. So SV, regardless of which tool you're using, really helps you agilize, right? It helps you remove those bottlenecks by creating these virtual endpoints. And as a developer, you don't even need the real endpoint to exist. For example, let's say you have an API definition in Swagger, and that API is implemented either by a microservice, a mainframe, SAP, who knows? Why do you care? You simply take that SAP, the API definition and create a synthetic virtual service out of it, right? It's that easy, right? As a developer, just do that. You don't even care what the backend is, right? So you create something that is easy, lightweight, and synthetic, solve your problem. And more importantly, you are actually helping out toward the rest of the lifecycle, because the tester can now take that same synthetic virtual service and either enhance it or replace it with a real service from our service recording, or you can put it behind an API gateway and say, you know what, regardless of the interactions I'm having between my consuming service and the provider service, it can either redirect to a virtual service or the real service if you go through an API gateway, right? So, I mean, all of those things are really, really great advantages from a developer perspective, particularly in the world of digital systems, where we know that we're going to have a lot of these. We're not building monolithic applications. We have a lot of these dependencies going on. So I think for a developer, it's very, very important for their ability to do something lightweight, synthetic, easy to use from an API. And they can also do as code, right? But I'm talking about, obviously Broadcom solutions. So we can develop a virtual service as code. So developer can do this in their IDE, Eclipse, or whatever. They don't have to leave the convenient programming environment. They can define a virtual service as code, and again, make it available to the other personas in the ecosystem so they can reuse that same virtual service that they created in the synthetically or as code.
Fantastic. Any closing comments, Raghu, on the subject?
Yeah, I think just to extend that, I think, thanks, Shamim. I think that was a very insightful view from a Broadcom perspective as well. But as a service provider, across TD and SV, the whole gamut, we have had the experience of working with Parasoft, K2View, GenRocket, Broadcom, and of course, each one has their sweet spot. Each one has their best contextual implementation. So to answer somebody's question, whether we have implemented in Broadcom technology also, the answer is yes. So from a closing comment perspective, Sai, at least from me, I think TD and SV, now if I combine both those components, they are very, very important clogs in the wheel that if you do not manage them well, which again, I allude to the fact that I'm not really talking about the entity, but the management of that entity. It can defeat the whole purpose of your broad vision of CI/CD and DevOps, because these two are very, very critical pieces that take away wait times, that improve efficiencies, that improve reliability of your software, and most importantly, get your software released on time with the highest quality. So I think these two are extremely important clogs that need to be managed end to end.
I'd like to just add one more point
Go ahead,
to that,
Shamim.
because I think you mentioned reliability, Raghu. That's such an important point for developers, right? So reliability is something that is engineered into the application, right? And one of the reasons why we find application developers don't do early performance and reliability testing is because of exactly the same problem, right? It's just too complicated to do a performance test. I think as one of the biggest benefits of SV, I think, from a development perspective, is being able to not only remove that bottleneck, but also simulate the endpoint performance. So now I can do early shift left performance testing, right? We talked about shift left functional testing quite a bit, but we don't talk about performance testing too much, right? So I can truly do unit performance testing, component level performance testing, by also simulating the performance of the endpoint, right? It's very, very, very important. And you will, open source tools like Mockito and those kind of things don't do that, right? Anyway, I think we should carry this for another half an hour.
Well,
why end it right now?
I was tempted to tell that we will be extending it to a workshop, because such has been the depth of insights that both of you have shared. But as they say, all good things have to end. I'm a little disappointed that I got to do this today, but it has been one extremely focused 60-minute conversation, which did, in my opinion, true justice to our notion of digital dialogues, bringing in pragmatic insights that are extremely valuable to the practitioner community. And Cigniti would continue to do that. And in cohesion with Broadcom, we're thrilled to announce this white paper, which I'm very sure for every one of you will be a rich treatise of information. I'm re-announcing the fact that this would be a recorded session live on our website, and the recorded version will reach out for every registrant. And with the feedback that is coming in, I'm sure we would do a part 2 of this in a little more detail, with few more innovation aspects that we would touch about. Stay tuned and write to us. Visit cigniti.com. And for a trial version of the tool, I'm sure Broadcom's website would offer the links, and we'll be happy to learn from your suggestions and continue to do this. And I once again wanted to thank the insights both Shamim and Raghu shared with extreme care, and a lot of examples that are quite relevant. Thanking you. Signing off from on behalf of everyone. Have a good day. My name is Sairam Vedam. I'm the host for today on behalf of Cigniti and Broadcom. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.